B-Ball 3710. Does the Fed ever have to sell its assets on the balance sheet? What would force them? Do they have to? No. Should they? Yes. Basically, they bought up all the assets as a way to bolster the market and keep prices high. But if there's a market crash, they're going to need cash. And to get cash, you got to sell that stuff, which is going to cause the market to crash even more. So they're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't zone. Like, they can't keep printing money and buying more securities, and they can't dump all the securities and crash the market because then they got to print money to make up for it. So they had this plan, like, oh, we're going to sell about this much every month, and it's just going to work its way down. And they've not stuck to that plan in any way, shape, or form because it seems like every month there's a new cataclysmic event that could take everything down, and they got to go and shore up more securities to keep the market from crashing. So the market seems to be so tenuous that the Fed is scared to quantitative tighten and to sell those securities. So yeah, they bought too many. They should let the sucker crash 2 years ago and then climb back up out of it then. Like, let the market crash during the COVID shutdown. You have all the excuses in the world for the market to crash during that time. Then do your printing and fix everything. But I think that they jumped the gun and didn't let the market correct itself a little bit, because we still have not fully recovered from supply chain issues and other stuff with COVID. So, Simon Houston, how long do you think until these meme stocks squeeze? This is taking forever. It's driving me crazy. Personally, I would have thought it would have all squeezed a long time ago. And this is a testament to the ability of the Federal Reserve to keep the market afloat. Like, everything is being held together with like gum and popsicle sticks at this point. So the fact that the market, that the SPY is at like 412 right now, when there's like no good news that should result in the SPY being worth 412. It defies all logic. Like, you get terrible job numbers, inflation's still bad, car repos are going through the roof, home sales aren't happening, like wars, potential defaults and debt, like everything is bad news. And people are like, green, baby, look into the future. It makes zero sense to me whatsoever. Like, everything is so detached from reality that how are you supposed to make good predictions and calls beyond like an hour from now? I have no idea. Personally, I think it would be better to just let the whole thing come crashing down, let the squeeze happen, and then start over from there with like a clean slate, a clean runestick. William Morgan, MOAS won't happen if they don't issue margin calls because nobody's enforcing the rules. Yeah, and you can't do margin calls when you've got 5,000 hedge funds underneath you. Like, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, and Goldman Sachs each have between 3,000 and 5,000 hedge funds underneath them that they've lent to, right? And each one of these hedge funds they've lent like tens or hundreds of billions of dollars to each and every single solitary one of these things. So you margin call one, cool, you're on the hook for that, right? But if you're having to sell positions in the market that they have, you're going to drop the price and value of all the others that are underneath you, and you're going to have to margin call all of them. If anything, this is an argument for why we need oodles more investment banks in this country. We can't keep letting them collapse and consolidate because they've got so many liabilities to their own clients that they cannot afford to do their job and to regulate their clients. So many hedge funds right now should be getting margin calls, but the investment banks are too scared. The prime brokers are too scared that if they do a margin call, it's going to be like Archegos, and they're going to be stuck with an incredible amount of debt. that they won't be able to close any of this stuff. All of a sudden it becomes real all of a sudden. And they end up like Credit Suisse, and you are about to go under. And you're begging for anyone, please, Saudis, come in and just give us money and save our, 300-year-old investment bank. I think if that's the case, they're going to need so much money from the central bankers to survive that it will make 08, 09 and the printing that was done in 2020 for the pandemic look like child's play. Absolutely child's play. It's so much money. I mean, let's say, okay, let's do a little math. Let's go. Okay, turn off the Chrome. Calculator. There we go. Go to the calculator. There's 4,500 hedge funds that are under just JP Morgan. 4,500 of them, right? 4,500 of them. If they are all, let's say out of those 4,500, the average is $1 billion in assets for every single one of those. You might have some at $400 million, some at $16 billion, whatever. Let's say the average is $1 billion, right? So their assets alone come out to $4.5 trillion. Where'd that 2 come from? What the what? Why is there a 2 in there? They did 200 plus. Oh, weird. Okay, one sec. I think I didn't clear out from the last time I was on here. Okay. 4,500 hedge funds times 1 billion. All right, so $4.5 trillion is how much the assets are of the hedge funds who trade using JP Morgan as a prime broker. Okay. Now, their liabilities are upwards of 30 times that, right? Because they get a 30x margin. So, JP Morgan's liabilities are in fact $135 trillion for those 4,500 hedge funds who trade underneath them. $135 trillion are the liabilities for just JP Morgan. This is like back of the napkin math, right? That's just assuming that the average hedge fund has $1 billion in assets and is trading at 30x on margin. So if JP Morgan wants to shut down one hedge fund who's a bad performer, then liquidate their assets. So all of a sudden a whole bunch of shares or bonds or whatever appear in the market. That's going to drive down the price of all the other stocks and bonds that are with all the other 499 hedge funds under them, and then they have to margin call them and liquidate them. It's just going to be a chain reaction across the entire board, and suddenly JP Morgan owes $135 billion in short securities that they don't have. Or sorry, $135 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion in securities they don't have. So where does that money come from? How does the Federal Reserve print $135 trillion? They can't. I mean, that's what? 15 times our entire economy? Right? The global economy is only 80 trillion. So just this one bank has $135 trillion in liabilities, more or less, to just hedge funds. This does not count, other investment portfolios, other institutions, pension funds, you name it, that they're working with. No one can afford to margin call anyone because all these banks have gotten too big. And the 30x margin limits are too much. Like, it shouldn't be more than 3. You can play with 3 times as much money as you have in assets. That's it. Now, if it was 3, divide the sucker by 10, right? And we can divide that by 10. And that's still $13 trillion that JP Morgan will be liable for, which is still more than any bank institution anyone has available to them anywhere. But 13.5 trillion is something that can be taken care of almost entirely via the reverse repo market and the almost $9 trillion in assets that the Federal Reserve has right now. So then we just have to print like another trillion or 2 on top of that. Cool beans. We can handle that. We can't handle 135 trillion. So that's just a lot of liability. And that's just one of the three major investment banks that are left. So Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch are almost just as bad. I think JP Morgan has the most liabilities out of them, but Goldman Sachs has like 5,000 hedge funds under them and family funds. So that's reason. That's probably the biggest reason why we aren't seeing any margin calls, because they can't afford it. They know it's just going to be a chain reaction and a meltdown of the entire system if they start margin calling. And they tested it with Archegos, and then went, oh, and Archegos was just an $800 million family fund. Like, they're small, they're tiny, they're nothing. So what happens when you do it when one that's a $10 or $20 billion hedge fund? Just oof.